All right, listen up, because what I'm about to tell you will flip the script on everything you thought you knew about avoiding partners. You know, the ones hot and cold, push and pull, there one day, ghosting the next. You chase, they run, you try harder, they shut down. And then just when you finally give up, boom, they're back. Why? Not because of some mystery, not because of magic. There's a reason rooted in psychology, human behavior, and the stuff most people are too emotionally exhausted to unpack. But today, we're going to unpack it. And once you understand it, you'll never chase the same way again. Let's go. Avoidant attachment isn't just about someone being bad at relationships. It's deeper than that. It's a survival strategy, wired into the nervous system often from early life experiences. People with avoidant attachment styles have typically learned consciously or unconsciously that closeness equals vulnerability, and vulnerability led to pain. Maybe it was an emotionally unavailable parent. Maybe it was praise that only came with performance, or love that felt conditional. So as a child, they adapted: don't rely on others, stay self-sufficient, keep emotions to yourself. That strategy may have helped them cope back then, but it wreaks havoc in adult relationships. Now fast forward to adulthood. They get into a relationship and things feel good at first. There's chemistry, laughter, maybe even a connection that surprises them. But as soon as things start to feel too close, when the emotional stakes get high, they start to pull away. They might suddenly get busy, become distant, or seem emotionally shut down. You're left wondering what just happened. Everything was fine, and now it feels like they're slipping away. That's the avoidant attachment cycle beginning to unfold. You reach out more, you over-explain. You try to reassure them, to get back to the version of them you first met, the one who was attentive and warm. But your efforts only push them further. They feel smothered. They interpret your need for connection as pressure or control, even if you're simply asking for clarity or closeness. Their system goes into self-protection mode. They might even begin rewriting the relationship in their head, telling themselves things like, "This is moving too fast," or "Maybe we're not right for each other." The more you pursue, the more they retreat. It's not personal. It's patterned. This dynamic isn't because they don't care. It's because they've been wired to equate intimacy with danger. They might not even fully understand what's happening themselves. On the outside, they may seem calm, cold, or indifferent, but internally, their nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do: protect them from emotional overwhelm by creating distance. Ironically, this is often when their partner starts trying even harder, initiating more contact, expressing more love, asking for conversations. And to an avoidant, this just reinforces the urge to withdraw. It becomes a dance of anxiety and avoidance, closeness and distance, and neither person feels secure. But here's where things get really interesting. This cycle is predictable. It follows a rhythm. Once you see it clearly, you can almost map it out like clockwork. It begins with closeness and connection, followed by an avoidance internal alarm system going off. Then comes the withdrawal, the partner's pursuit, and the eventual breakdown of communication. But there's a twist, because the cycle doesn't just end when you stop chasing. That's actually when something unexpected happens. The avoidance starts to come back. Why? Because once you stop trying, once you detach emotionally and reclaim your power, the avoidant finally feels safe again. They sense the pressure has lifted. Your emotional energy isn't pulling on them anymore, and suddenly they're curious. They wonder why you're not reaching out. Their mind begins to replay the good moments. Their fear of intimacy gets quiet enough for them to feel the loss. In other words, the same nervous system that pushed them away when you pursued now pulls them back when you let go. It's paradoxical but real. The avoidant attachment cycle is not about love or the lack of it. It's about regulation. It's about someone's learned instinct to cope with connection by creating distance. And when you understand that, truly understand it, you stop taking their behavior personally. You stop blaming yourself. You stop thinking, if I just said this differently, or if I hadn't been so emotional, none of that would have changed the outcome, because their pullback wasn't about your words. It was about their wiring. But here's the powerful part. Once you recognize the cycle, you're no longer trapped in it. You can step out of the pattern. You can choose not to play the game. You can say, I deserve a relationship where connection doesn't feel like a threat. You can stop overfunctioning. You can stop rescuing, chasing, and waiting. That's not giving up, it's leveling up. And paradoxically, that's when the avoidant often starts to return. Because in your absence, they're finally confronted not with your pursuit, but with their own emotion. And that's when the real growth, if they're ready for it, can begin. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, closeness doesn't feel comforting, it feels risky. While most people crave intimacy and connection as a source of safety and belonging, avoidants often experience the exact opposite. Emotional closeness can trigger a sense of suffocation, vulnerability, and even panic. This isn't because they don't want love or connection deep down. It's because on a nervous system level, they have learned that emotional intimacy is unpredictable, unstable, or even dangerous. So distance becomes their comfort zone. It's where they feel the most in control, the most secure, and the least emotionally overwhelmed. This isn't always obvious at first. Many avoidantly attached people can seem charming, open, and even deeply affectionate at the beginning of a relationship. That's because initial connection feels low stakes. It's exciting, exploratory, and surface level enough that they can stay emotionally regulated. But as soon as the relationship begins to deepen, when real emotional investment starts to build, that's when the internal alarms go off. That's when they start needing space, pulling away, becoming distracted or emotionally numb. And often even they don't fully understand why. What's really happening is that their nervous system is trying to protect them. Emotional closeness triggers old, unresolved memories of feeling trapped, unseen, or emotionally neglected, so they instinctively retreat. It's not always a conscious decision. They may rationalize it by saying, I just need space, I don't want to lose my independence, or something feels off. But beneath those words is a deeper fear, the fear of being consumed by someone else's emotions, the fear of losing themselves in the relationship, or the fear of being seen and then rejected. Distance then becomes their safe haven. It gives them space to breathe, to reset, to feel like themselves again. In fact, when they're alone, they often feel more at peace because they're not being asked to navigate emotional demands they don't know how to meet. They can compartmentalize their feelings, focus on work, hobbies, or routines, and avoid the emotional intensity that relationships inevitably bring. From the outside, this might look like coldness or indifference, but in reality, it's a survival mechanism. It's how they regulate overwhelming emotional input by shutting it out. Now, the tricky part is that this desire for distance doesn't mean they don't care. In many cases, they care deeply. But caring too much is exactly what terrifies them, because deep emotional involvement increases the chances of being hurt, disappointed, or abandoned. So instead of leaning into those feelings, they suppress them. They convince themselves that they're better off alone, or that the other person is too much or not right for them. This mental distancing helps justify the emotional withdrawal. It helps them feel safe again. For their partner, this can be incredibly confusing and painful. One minute, things are close and connected. The next, they feel like a stranger. The natural response is to try to reestablish connection, to talk it through, to show love, to seek reassurance. But these efforts, no matter how well-intentioned, often make the avoidant feel more trapped. They interpret the other person's desire for closeness as pressure or emotional dependency. And so they pull back further, reinforcing the very disconnection the partner is trying to resolve. What's important to understand here is that the avoidant is not necessarily trying to hurt anyone. They're trying to survive. They've built an entire identity around being self-sufficient, not needing anyone, and staying emotionally strong. Admitting they need connection or that someone else affects them deeply can feel like weakness, or worse, it can expose them to emotional risk. So they cling to distance as a way to protect their sense of self. It becomes a shield against vulnerability. Ironically, many avoidants actually long for connection deep down. They want love, intimacy, and partnership just like anyone else. But they want it on terms that don't threaten their autonomy or trigger their fears. This creates a paradox. They crave closeness, but when it arrives, they feel the need to escape it. So they often end up in a push-pull dynamic, drawing someone in, then backing away once it feels too real. The relationship becomes a tug-of-war between their desire for connection and their fear of losing control. Understanding this can be incredibly liberating, not just for the avoidant, but for the partner as well. When you realize that their distance isn't a personal rejection, but a deeply ingrained coping mechanism, you can stop internalizing and you can stop chasing and start choosing what you need, rather than trying to fix or decode them. You begin to see that their comfort with distance has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their wiring. Ultimately, distance feels safe to avoidance because it keeps them from confronting the parts of themselves they've never fully processed. It lets them stay in control, maintain emotional boundaries, and avoid the deep vulnerability that relationships inevitably require. But true growth, true connection only happens when they begin to recognize this pattern and start doing the inner work to challenge it. Because while distance may feel safe, it also keeps them lonely, stuck, and emotionally unavailable. And deep down, that's not what they really want. Something powerful happens when you stop trying so hard to fix a relationship with an avoidant partner. When you finally stop chasing, stop over-explaining, stop pouring emotional energy into someone who keeps pulling away, everything shifts. The entire dynamic flips. It's like a seesaw. When you're up, they're down. And when you come down, they finally start to rise. But this isn't just about mind games or reverse psychology. It's about energy, boundaries, and the deeply human experience of what happens when someone realizes they're no longer the center of your emotional world. At the heart of it is this: when you're constantly reaching out, over-giving, or emotionally laboring for connection, the balance of power leans heavily in one direction. Not because you're weak or needy, but because you're trying to hold something together that isn't being mutually nurtured. You're the one making the emotional investments, driving the conversations, and trying to create intimacy while they're dodging it. It becomes an emotional tug of war you can't win, because the more effort you put in, the more they feel the need to protect themselves by pulling away. Avoidant individuals often don't respond well to emotional intensity. When they sense someone is highly invested or emotionally dependent, their inner alarm system goes off. It's not that they don't want to be cared for. It's that they associate emotional closeness with the loss of independence, overwhelm, or pressure. So even your loving gestures can start to feel intrusive to them. The harder you try to get close, the more they withdraw, and the more they withdraw, the more you feel the urge to pursue. It's a toxic loop that feeds itself. But when you stop, when you step back emotionally, reclaim your energy, and redirect your focus inward, everything changes. First, you create emotional space. Not the kind of space that's designed to manipulate them into coming back, but the kind that allows you to breathe again. The kind of space that lets you remember who you are outside of this exhausting dynamic. You stop trying to decode every message. Stop overanalyzing every word and start reconnecting with your own peace. And that shift in energy is powerful. Not just for you, but for them too. When an avoidant partner no longer feels that constant emotional pull, they experience relief at first. There's no one asking for intimacy, no one demanding connection. They finally feel free from the pressure they've associated with closeness. But with time, a different feeling begins to surface. One they're not as comfortable with: curiosity, then confusion, then something much deeper: loss. You see, when you were chasing, they could convince themselves that you were always going to be there. Your presence was predictable. Your affection was certain. They never had to miss you because you were emotionally available at all times. But when you stop showing up in the same way, when you detach and start prioritizing your own needs, their certainty begins to unravel. Suddenly, they're not the one in control. They no longer know what you're thinking or feeling. You're not reacting to them. You're not reaching out. And for someone who relied on emotional distance as a way to regulate their world, this unpredictability can be deeply unsettling. For the first time, they're forced to sit with their own emotions. They begin to reflect, not because you told them to, but because your silence holds up a mirror. This is where the power shift truly takes place. You're no longer at the mercy of their emotional availability. You're not waiting for breadcrumbs, not begging for clarity. You're grounded in yourself again. That self-assurance, that emotional autonomy speaks volume. And ironically, it's often what draws them back. Avoidants may not respond well to emotional pursuit, but they do respond to absence because it triggers something they've long buried: the fear of losing a good thing, the fear of losing you. But here's the key. This shift only works when it's genuine. If you're stepping back just to get a reaction, they'll feel the manipulation and it'll reinforce their need for distance. But when you truly let go, when you stop tying your worth to their affection and instead start showing up fully for yourself, everything changes. That's when they might reach out. That's when they might start showing interest again. But by then, you'll be in a very different place. Stronger, clearer, and more discerning. Because this power shift isn't about making someone chase you. It's about ending the chase entirely. It's about understanding that you don't have to lose yourself to be loved. You don't have to overfunction, overexplain, or overextend just to keep someone close. Real connection doesn't require emotional acrobatics. It requires mutual effort, presence, and respect. And if someone can only value you once you walk away, they were never valuing you in the first place. They were valuing the control they had when you stayed. So when you let go, you're not giving up. You're taking your power back. You're choosing peace over confusion, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over validation. And in that choice, you stop being the one who's waiting and start being the one who's free. That's the real shift. And once it happens, you'll never chase the same way again. One of the most misunderstood aspects of avoidant behavior in relationships is something called emotional object permanence, or rather the lack of it. Most people are familiar with object permanence in infants, the understanding that when a toy or person disappears from sight, it still exists. Babies don't have this awareness at first, which is why peekaboo is so magical to them. But for people with avoidant attachment styles, a similar issue exists. When someone is not right in front of them, actively expressing love, connection, or presence, the avoidant person can struggle to feel that connection continues to exist. It's like out of sight, out of heart. This doesn't mean avoidants are incapable of love. In fact, many deeply desire connection, but their emotional wiring creates a disconnect. They often have trouble holding on to the emotional presence of someone else when that person is not actively showing up in the moment. So if you're not texting, calling, or reaching out, you can begin to feel distant or even non-existent in their inner world. It's not necessarily a conscious decision. It's a default setting. Without immediate emotional stimuli, the avoidant may not maintain the sense of closeness others naturally do. Relationships for them often feel very in the now, and when that now is absent, the emotional bond starts to fade in their awareness. This can make relationships with them feel very destabilizing. You might feel like you've built something meaningful, had a deep conversation, or shared a vulnerable moment, only to have them seem disconnected or aloof the next day. You feel confused. You wonder if they even cared. But what's really happening is a kind of emotional amnesia. If they're not presently immersed in the feeling of connection, they struggle to recall its emotional weight. It's not that it wasn't real. It's that their emotional memory doesn't hold on to it the same way yours might. This is also why so many avoidants can walk away from a relationship without appearing devastated. When connection is no longer active in their environment, it can feel like it simply vanishes. They may not be overwhelmed with loss at first because the emotional tether isn't constantly alive for them. But this isn't the full story, because later, when the silence stretches out and they're no longer receiving even subtle signals of your presence, something unexpected can happen. That emptiness starts to register. They begin to feel the absence, and with it, the memory of what they had starts coming back to the surface. That's often the moment they circle back. You see, many avoidants don't actually process emotional loss in real time. They avoid it, suppress it, or detach from it completely. But when someone is truly gone, when their presence, affection, and energy are no longer filling the space, the avoidant may suddenly realize they miss that connection. It's not necessarily because you've done anything differently on the outside. It's because your absence becomes felt in a way they're not used to. And only when they have the space to sit in that stillness without your energy trying to close the gap can they start to register what they once tried so hard not to feel. This is why pulling back, genuinely pulling back, not pretending, can be so powerful. It gives them the emotional space their system craves, but it also allows the natural consequence of that distance to unfold. The silence speaks louder than words. They don't hear from you, don't feel your emotional presence, and for the first time, they're left alone with the weight of their own emotional memory. And here's the irony: what they couldn't feel in your presence, they often begin to feel in your absence. Understanding emotional object permanence can help you stop internalizing their behavior. When they go quiet or distant, it's not necessarily about you. It's not proof you were unimportant or that the connection wasn't real. It's about how their brain and emotions function. And it also explains why they often come back. Not because they've changed dramatically, but because the space gave them a chance to reconnect with what was previously emotionally muted. But this doesn't mean you should sit around waiting for them to feel your absence. It's not about stepping back to trigger a return. It's about recognizing that their inability to hold emotional connection in your absence is their challenge to work through. You don't have to keep reproving your love, reestablishing the bond, or keeping yourself on their emotional radar just to be remembered. That's exhausting. and it's not sustainable. Healthy love doesn't require constant reminders that it exists. So when you understand this concept, something inside you clicks. You stop blaming yourself. You stop thinking their withdrawal is your fault. You stop trying to fill the silence with more effort. And more importantly, you start to see the difference between real emotional intimacy and the illusion of connection built on proximity and performance. The truth is, love that disappears when you're not performing for it isn't love you should have to chase. And people who only remember your value when you're gone aren't always ready to receive the kind of love you have to offer. Emotional object permanence isn't just a psychological quirk, it's a signpost. A way of seeing clearly where someone is in their ability to hold emotional space and whether or not that space can include you when you're not constantly filling it. When you stop chasing an avoidant partner and genuinely let go, something begins to unfold in them that they didn't expect. Emotional reflection. Avoidant individuals are often so skilled at compartmentalizing their emotions that they rarely sit with uncomfortable feelings long enough to process them. They move away, distract themselves, dive into work, hobbies, routines, anything that keeps them from feeling too much. But when you stop reaching out, stop engaging, and most importantly, stop feeding the emotional dynamic they're used to, you create a silence that no distraction can fully erase. That silence becomes a mirror. At first, they feel relief. Avoidants usually associate space with safety. No one is asking them to talk about their feelings. No one is waiting for a response, pressing for answers, or expressing needs that make them feel inadequate or trapped. So the first wave is calm, even lightness. But then the silence stretches, and in that space, they're left with nothing but themselves and the emotional residue of what they pushed away. This is when reflection starts to creep in, often in subtle, slow ways. They might hear a song that reminds them of you. Pass by a place you went together. Scroll through old texts. These aren't dramatic movie moments. They're quiet internal nudges that begin to chip away at the wall they built. And because they're no longer having to defend themselves from emotional pressure, they can finally feel the weight of what they've lost. For the first time, they're not reacting to your pursuit. They're sitting in the stillness you left behind. What's important here is that avoidants aren't cold or heartless. They're defended. Their nervous systems are wired to avoid emotional overwhelm, and relationships, especially when deep feelings are involved, can feel threatening. But once the threat is gone, once the pressure to connect or explain themselves disappears, they have the bandwidth to feel, and when they finally feel safe enough to reflect, they often realize things they couldn't access before, that they miss your energy, that they took your presence for granted, that their fear drove you away. This doesn't mean they always come back with perfect clarity or a changed mindset, but it does mean they start to look inward. Maybe for the first time in a long time, they begin to recognize patterns. They think about how they've handled past relationships. They ask themselves why intimacy always seems to slip through their fingers. These are difficult questions for someone who has spent most of their life avoiding vulnerability, but they surface because your silence leaves them with no one else to focus on but themselves. And this is a crucial part of the journey, not just for them, but for you. Because you've stepped away, you've stopped trying to manage their emotions or win their attention. You've created the space for them to experience their own inner world without your emotional labor holding everything up. And here's the truth. People can't grow if someone else is always doing the emotional heavy lifting for them. Reflection requires discomfort. It requires silence. It requires the absence of the thing they've taken for granted. This is why pulling back isn't about punishment. It's about protection. You're protecting your own peace. Yes, but you're also giving them the only real opportunity to confront themselves. If you stay in constant contact, keep checking in, keep proving your love, they never have to look at what's really going on inside them. They never have to feel the cost of their avoidance. They never have to ask themselves, what am I really afraid of? Or why do I keep pushing people away? Emotional reflection for an avoidant doesn't usually happen through confrontation. It happens in quiet moments when they realize the connection they dismissed isn't coming back to fill the space. It happens when they remember how safe you made them feel, even if they couldn't appreciate it at the time. It happens when they look around and realize the connection they once feared is now gone. And maybe, just maybe, they want it back. But here's the hard truth. Not all avoidants will act on that reflection. Some will feel the loss but stay stuck in their fear. Some will recognize the pattern but lack the tools to change it. And that's not your responsibility to fix. Your role was never to be the catalyst for someone else's healing. Your role is to honor your own emotional needs, to step back when connection becomes too one-sided, and to let go with grace. Because when you do that, you're not just creating space for them to reflect, you're choosing your own growth over someone else's avoidance. And that shift away from emotional caretaking and towards self-respect is where your own healing begins. The silence you leave behind doesn't just echo in their world. It transforms yours. It gives you the clarity you were missing, the peace you were craving, and the strength to stop settling for a love that only exists when you're doing all the work. Whether they return or not becomes secondary. What matters is that you found yourself in the quiet, and that's where real transformation begins. When you finally stop chasing someone with an avoidant attachment style, something unexpected often happens. They come back. And when they do, it's not because you manipulated the situation or played some clever game. It's because your absence did something that your presence never could. It allowed them to feel the impact of losing you without resistance. It created a void where your energy used to be, and that void spoke louder than all your efforts ever did. This is the moment they return, and it's the moment you're faced with a decision that can only come from a place of deep self-awareness. Do you let them back in or not? What you need to know is that this moment, the return, isn't the fairy tale ending people often fantasize about. It's not the guaranteed signal that they've changed or that the relationship will magically work now. What it is, though, is a test, a reflection, a mirror. Because in the time you've stepped back and done the work to reclaim your peace, you've changed, you've grown. You've had to face your own patterns, why you stayed so long, why you overfunctioned, why you kept trying to earn love from someone who couldn't fully receive it. That internal shift matters more than anything they might say when they come back. Avoidant individuals often return when the pressure is off and they no longer feel overwhelmed by someone else's emotional needs. But this return doesn't mean they've resolved their fear of intimacy. It often just means they feel safe again. Safe to re-engage without the demands they associate with closeness. You need to understand that unless they've done real work to confront their avoidance and heal their attachment wounds, they're likely stepping back into the same old dynamic. And if you haven't done your own work, you might fall back into it too. That's why the real power lies not in their return, but in your response to it. By the time they circle back, you've had space to gain clarity. You've had time to reflect, to grieve, to reconnect with yourself. You've realized how exhausting it was to constantly fight for scraps of affection, to carry the emotional weight of the relationship alone. You've seen how much more peaceful life can be when you're not constantly walking on eggshells, overthinking every word, and trying to decode mixed signals. And in that space, your standards have quietly risen. So when they show up again, maybe with a, "Hey, I've been thinking about you," or "I miss you," it's no longer enough because now you're seeing the pattern clearly. You understand that missing you is not the same as being ready for you. You understand that a reappearance is not a transformation, that nostalgia is not commitment. And most importantly, you understand that the part of you that used to cling to their return has been replaced by a version of you that values peace over potential. This moment demands honesty, deep, brutal honesty with yourself. Do you still want them, or do you just want to feel wanted? Do you trust their return, or are you hoping they've changed without real evidence? Are you emotionally prepared to risk getting pulled back into the same dynamic, or are you ready to let this chapter close, even if part of you still wonders what could have been? Letting someone back in just because they came back is not growth. Growth is knowing that just because someone returns doesn't mean they deserve a front row seat in your life again. They might still be avoidant. They might still be emotionally limited. They might still fear closeness and pull away the moment things feel vulnerable again. If nothing has changed, if no work has been done, then nothing changes. On the other hand, if they've genuinely reflected, done the hard emotional work, and returned with not just words, but evidence of growth, you can meet that version of them with the new version of you. That might mean slowly rebuilding trust, setting clear boundaries, or having honest conversations about what you both need to feel safe and connected. But even then, it's no longer about fear of losing them. It's about choosing whether they're truly aligned with where you're going, not just where you've been. This is the deeper truth. Their return is not your reward. Your healing is. Their return is not your closure. Your self-respect is. Their presence is not proof of your worth. Your peace, your clarity, your boundaries, that's where your worth lives now. So if they come back, take your time. Listen not just to their words, but to your body, your intuition, your experience. Ask yourself if what they're offering now is what you actually want, or if it just reminds you of what you once wished it could be. You're not the same person who once chased them. You've changed. And now the choice is entirely yours, not from a place of desperation, but from a place of power. Whether you choose to reconnect or walk away for good, make sure the decision comes from your healing, not your old wounds. Because at the end of the day, the most powerful comeback isn't theirs, it's yours. The moment you chose yourself over confusion, the moment you let go not just of them, but of the need to be chosen by someone who wasn't ready. And the moment you realized you were never waiting for them to come back. You were waiting to come back to yourself. So here's the truth. When you finally stop chasing, stop proving, stop bending yourself to fit into a space that was never built to hold all of you, something powerful happens. You come home to yourself. And in that stillness and that decision to let go, not to get them back, but to get you back, you reclaim your worth. Avoidants might come back when you give up, but the real story isn't about their return. It's about your return to clarity, to peace, to self-respect. The person who once begged for breadcrumbs is now the one setting the table for something real. You no longer fear the silence because you understand what it gave you, freedom, perspective, and the strength to never settle for halfway love again. So whether they come back or not, the most important thing is this. You're no longer waiting, you're choosing. And that choice changes everything.